So I'll be preaching sermons that you've suggested to me, and a few of you came up with the idea of a sermon on the topic of immigration. And I just think with recent events that are happening in our country right now, particularly in Minnesota, that this is really an important topic. And so I'll try to give some thoughts on what would be a Christian response on the topic of immigration. I would say a very short sermon that I could do on this would be to say that the short answer is this. Jesus said, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." Matthew 25. So, sermon's done. Wasn't that one of my best sermons ever? Very short. But he didn't say, what Jesus didn't say was, "I was a stranger with the right paperwork. I was a stranger who posed no risk. I was a stranger whose presence made you uncomfortable." And he didn't say, "I was a stranger who spoke without an accent." He said, "I was a stranger." And then Jesus made the most unsettling claim of all, and Jesus does that to us all the time. And he says, "Just as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me." And that hard teaching shows the enduring power of what Jesus offers us and why we read the gospel each week. Because we humans have a hard time processing 2,000 years later that challenge. But Jesus is clear, there's no us versus them. What we do to the least of these, we do to God. The call to hospitality, I was just glancing, there's at least 50 times, but many, many more, but 50 times specifically that we're called to be hospitable to those who are strangers in Scripture. And you remember that story about Sodom and Gomorrah that we were all taught by churches that this was the anti-gay passage? Well, Jesus said it was about something else. Jesus said it was about the sin of inhospitality, so how you treat people. And that's gotten kind of twisted and lost. And so that's a real challenge before us. Now, the Swedenborg Church in our denomination has a long history of building upon immigrants. Just this last week, I read this delightful 2-volume history. I don't think anybody else is going to read it, but it's a history of the Swedenborg Church in Frankfort, Philadelphia, at which my grandfather led for 40 years. And it was a long history of church building with immigrants. And my grandfather, who was his father was an immigrant, but he married his wife, a German immigrant, after World War I in Germany. And the whole thing was, they were speaking German, it was German churches. They were speaking German to the Swedenborgians here in the United States. So we've been an immigrant church throughout all the generations, and that's part of our history. And frankly, I think the best way to think about immigration in the United States is that we're all immigrants. Technically, even Native Americans crossed into the continent. But some, like my family, came 150 years ago, some a lot earlier, many in the last few years. And I've always felt that factor, that we're a country of immigrants, is what makes America great. And I get into topics in the headlines, and I don't preach from whatever the headlines are each week, and I don't ever tell you what to think about politically, but I do think it's appropriate for us to look at issues that we're facing and see, is there any kind of spiritual lens we can put on this that will help guide us? And you can come to your own thoughts. And of course, in our community, we have discussion time where you can share how you look at it. So right now in the United States, we can look at this issue, and on immigration, I'll just say up front, there is a right way and a wrong way to immigrate into the United States. And when people have abused it, they should have to leave and do it properly. And that's the right way to immigrate. But it does not justify the way we're treating immigrants right now in the United States. With the aggressive actions by ICE around the country, I've found myself getting very angry as I've watched events unfold. We see a level of intensity around immigration enforcement that feels very different than anything we've seen before, where masked men are essentially kidnapping people off the street here in D.C. off his bike, but you see people showing up for their courthouse hearings. You see it in neighborhoods, you see it at warehouses, you see it at workplaces, and often it's because you look Hispanic or African, or you have an accent. One of the more comical clips that I saw was an ICE agent with a thick Spanish accent trying to capture somebody who had a thick Spanish accent. And the other guy says, you have an accent too. So that's not the way that we do things, by identifying people on their skin color, their accent. Now, what's interesting and important, and why it's important for us to talk about it, is that the church is speaking up about this, and many churches are speaking up. One of the most outstanding clips I've seen, and it's well worth watching, I'll put it into the newsletter, is the Catholic bishops released a really beautiful message about how this is really dehumanizing the rhetoric around immigrants right now, and how dangerous it is. So, but it's very well done, very balanced, very, very well done. A more striking example was the Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire, who told his fellow clergy to get your affairs in order, suggesting that the time has come to put our bodies on the line to protect the vulnerable. And a friend of mine who's a pastor of an evangelical church in Northern Virginia announced to his congregation that if ICE comes to their church, he'll go to jail with them if needed. So these are faith leaders really speaking out at a very critical time. So I said my goal was really to give like more of a lens for us to look at current events. And here's one that I find helpful, and particularly from the Swedenborgian tradition. In the Swedenborgian tradition, we believe that God is the combination of both divine love and divine wisdom, and that one can't function without the other. And so this, I think, gives us a really helpful lens to look at the immigration issue. In the physical world that we live in, wisdom teaches us that we need boundaries. Homes need walls to provide safety for the family within. A nation needs boundaries to maintain order and necessary function. So without order, we really can't be useful. The ability for people to work, trade, and care for one another requires order, and so boundaries can be very important. But here's the danger. When you have wisdom without love, it becomes a cold, rigid legalism. It enforces the letter of the law while crushing the human spirit. The policies that we're seeing played out now by ICE are legalistic without compassion. So conversely, when you have love without wisdom, it can be chaotic sentimentality that ignores practical needs of the whole community. So I would say many of the policies of the last administration encouraged caravans of people to walk across the border and petition for protection and then disappear before they went to their hearings. And that, I would say, was compassion without wisdom. And that they feed each other. So I would say this isn't an attack on one political party or the other. I think both have failed. And on one side, people are about love that can often lack order, while the other side champions a wisdom that's lost its heart. In this moment that we're in right now, when I'm preaching today, we're seeing the pendulum has swung. We're seeing a law, truth, without love. Ideal policies that we would want to move forward would be marrying love and wisdom together. So I think that's a really great lens for any policy issues, this combination of love and wisdom. Here's another important thing to look at from a Christian perspective, is that Jesus says that my kingdom is not of this world. So in the natural world, we are citizens of a country, and we have laws and we have borders. But when we look also through a spiritual lens as people who claim to be followers of Jesus, we're part of a broader kingdom that exists where we believe everyone is created in the image of God. Every person, regardless of what papers they carry, is a child of the divine. And we are all spiritual immigrants on this earth for a short time. If we have the privilege of being born in more affluent places, we have an obligation to live by, when I was hungry, you gave me food. None of us chose to be born in the most affluent place in the world. None of us earned it. It's a blessing. And the same is true of the migrant. The migrant didn't choose their circumstances. So when we see the migrant, we must see them as part of the body of Christ. And grace of God, there go I. Supporting those who are less fortunate financially is actually a spiritual opportunity for us to grow. It's an obligation. In Jesus' kingdom, the citizenship that matters is whether we've learned to love our neighbor as ourselves. And our task as Christians is to honor the practical needs of the physical world, never losing sight of the spiritual reality that transcends all borders. Swedenborg taught that in a healthy society that everyone can contribute to different parts of where they can service. And I believe when we terrorize people who are delivering Amazon packages or putting roofs on our houses or tearing them out of their motorcycles as they deliver things, I believe that is ripping apart the fabric of a healthy society. And if we cannot see Christ in the face of those frightened workers, we've lost the gospel itself. So, yes, we can advocate for secure borders, and I think we should. Wisdom demands it. But we cannot accept the terrorism of families as the price of that order. Love forbids that. So in times like this, we struggle now to know how to make our voices heard and how to be faithful witnesses. And we have a very diverse congregation of ways we engage. And I know that many of you, I've talked to you this last week, many of you have found ways that you can engage on this. And I think we all want to start our day with the prayer, Lord, how can I be most useful? And when we're concerned about this situation, we can ask specifically, how can I be most useful in a time like this? For some of you, that's going to be to organize politically, which is great. Others will be prayer vigils. Some will be protests. And some of us will work at building bridges across the divide, which I'm attempting to do with my cultural translation training. There's many ways to be a faithful witness, and we need all of them at this time. And so we can do it both strategically, but we can also do it at the very personal level. One person I remember who attended this church one time said, "Is everybody in your church an immigrant? Because there's so many different accents." And I said, I just love that about Church of the Holy See. We have been a congregation of immigrants with very different backgrounds, and I love that. So, and all of us have immigrants in our lives somewhere. And so I think it's important for us to also, at a personal level, during these times, to make it clear to the people in our lives who are immigrants, who are recent immigrants, that they're loved, that we care about them. That could be the person who serves you or delivers a package, or someone working to repair your street, or it could be someone you know very well, it's a dear friend. But I think it's important for us to look them in the eye, learn their name if you can, and let them know that they're seen, that they're valued, and they belong here. We have to move our hearts from an us-them mentality to a mentality that says, I see you and I love you. When we begin to do that, we can really begin to be useful. And so my prayer for all of us is that God of love and a God of wisdom can give us the heart to love the stranger and the mind to build a world of order. Help us to see through the fog of fear, and when we're confused, lead us back to the simple truth that what we do to the least of these, we do to God. Amen. Any questions and comments? Charlotte and James have joined us in space here, so we have a nice, cozy, warm little chapel here on this cold day. Any questions, comments? And I would particularly say, if you disagree with what I've said, I'd love for you to share that too, because it's a very controversial topic. I realize that, but I think, and I'm giving you the best of my take on it. But if you disagree, I would welcome that too.
I have a question.
Yeah, James?
We were listening late on that drive-in. So my question is, are borders heavenly? I think are borders heavenly? It's a really simple question. And I want to caveat it because a lot of the argument that I heard you make was like that borders are tolerable. that they can be wise, sort of as they currently exist. But there are a bunch of cases, like when we look at in Syria and some of these conflicts interethnically, where borders don't currently exist. And there's a question about should we partition states, that kind of thing. So taking that additional lens of like, maybe we don't have to have borders. Maybe we can have times like the European Union where in the Schengen area they don't really do borders. Is that better, right? So I wanted to challenge that question. Like, our borders
Before I
have...
answer, since you, first of all, you
Yeah.
are, so just so everybody, can you hear, I don't know if you can hear me, but James is a expert working on international affairs. And so before I answer the question, I'd love for you to give your take, because you are very knowledgeable of this, and then I'll give my take on it.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on the spiritual side of it, so I'm asking it kind of as a good faith question. I don't have a thesis yet, but I think that like the fundamental concept of a border is to exclude, is to create in and out groups that can challenge each other in like a kind of a Machiavellian political pursuit of acquiring goods for the in-group, right, and excluding an out-group from it. And if you were to apply like the systematic theology here of Christ on like a grand scale, it would be to not do that. It would be sort of to permit these commonwealth natural resources of like clean water availability and energy and electricity and like things like that to be kind of available to anyone that is willing to like pick up their piece in the economy and like participate. But you've also preached on boundaries before, and I think that that's a blind spot in my theology, and so I wanted to hear kind of how you feel.
This is someone who goes to global hotspots and works like in Syria or whatever, and so I want to get your take first. I would put that in the same category as I would put, do we need a military? Because in the ideal world, do we need a military? No, but wouldn't that be great? We just have no borders. Imagine there's no country. John Lennon. I don't believe that's the reality of the world that we're in right now. So I think in the world we're in now, we need borders, we need military, we need defense. There's a lot of very dangerous countries. Although I have to say, this week, I never thought we'd be challenging Europe in a situation like this is just beyond the pale with Greenland. So anyway, no, I think that borders are necessary. They create order and structure. So that's that. Now, as the Christian, though, I did a lot of work in Mexico, and I'm proud to do it as an American. But when we look across the border and we see someone suffering across it, or I know that others of you who have worked for USAID, for example, that's what our country did. We helped. That those are children of God, no different, and we have an obligation. So from a spiritual perspective, there are no borders in that sense. That we have an obligation to help the least of these everywhere we can, realistically. But I'll just, as a contrast, and maybe Alpha, who's here, might remember this, but I preached years ago when Germany opened its borders to Syria. I did say in that message, I remember because I got pushback on it, this could have very negative consequences, because I don't think this is love without order. If you do this, you could actually create far-right groups in Europe at some point by opening the borders and, too fast. And it wasn't thought out, and it was probably guilt about the Second World War, that kind of thing. So these things also have repercussions. And I've mentioned before David Fromm's famous quote, if liberals don't keep the borders, fascists will. I think there's something to that effect. There's something to that. So also, I think we have to be aware logistically, where are we playing in that pendulum? If we're not acknowledging this and we're going that way, are we feeding something that will metastasize in the future? So that would be my take. But the challenge for Christians is that Jesus says, love your enemy. That's a challenge, and look after the least of these. I think that's less of a challenge, but still, that's going to be global anywhere we see it. And I was always proud of our country. I worked on the PEPFAR program. I was always proud of our country for being generous. And we're losing that right now as well, our generosity. It's very, selfish. So I disagree with all that's been done on those things. So border, yes, but yeah, do we have an obligation to help people in Africa? I do, or Mexico, or wherever. So great question, and thanks for all the work you do on those borders around the world. Ross, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Uh, Thank you for a good sermon. I'm concerned about the border. It's fine to say we need border, but we also need humane immigration laws, and and we need, as you have pointed out, we need humane immigration. We need humane enforcement. Trump ran on leading a lot of us to believe, not me, but he was talking about focusing on violent uh, criminals when he was talking about deporting. But of course, at the same time, he was talking about deporting millions, and anyone who knows the statistics know that that meant he would wind up doing what he's actually doing. Um, I heard a discussion recently where somebody was kind of defending Trump by saying, look how many people, I guess it was Obama deported, but apparently 90% of those deportees were actually violent criminals. But the other part of the thing, the laws that go along with borders, the Republicans had three chances to make them better, because I think it's been since like 1982 or 92 since the laws have been changed. And in 2013, the uh, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill, which Senator Lindsey Graham voted for, but the House Speaker wouldn't bring it to a vote in the House. It would have easily passed, but not with a
Mm-hmm.
majority of the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had um, uh, last year you had uh,
But can you
Mr.
turn that into a question, or like, are you? I think what you're saying is that I talked about borders, but the policy isn't very fair and the enforcement hasn't been fair. Is that what you're getting
Yeah,
at?
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And I would just say, yeah. And one thing is, so the policies are not fair, and but that is I would personally say a pox on both houses of government that they when the Democrats were in control, they didn't deal with it either. I don't think it's a Democrat Republican issue so much. I would resist the temptation to like feel defensive of one party or the other and make sure it's just them. If we can also see that these things bounce back and forth, and so what's clear to your point is not solving the immigration issue as a political winner on both sides, unfortunately. And so neither party, when they've had majorities, have really dealt with it effectively. That's why I'm saying that a policy of love and truth that brings both together, I believe, would be the most successful in the long run. But I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. That is we created a very complex policy that made people kind of want to work around the system because the system was so stuck. But thank you for that, Jose, and then Jason here. Okay, or Katie, maybe Jose or Katie. It's always a surprise.
Yeah, it's Jose. First, I just wanted to say I really appreciated the sermon and thank you for giving it. My question is, what would you say to those who I think twist scripture or even aphorisms, say things like, well, charity begins at home. There are concentric circles. You take care of your family first, and then your friends, and then your own country, and you got to draw the line somewhere, and use that as the justification for the especially harsher immigration policies, because it seems to me that from a Christian perspective, if you're rooted in Christian doctrine, you should definitely have a thumb on the side of inclusiveness. And Jesus is pretty explicit. If you are going to follow Jesus, you should err on the side of welcoming the immigrant and caring for the immigrant. And that line that you draw on when you're taking care of yourselves versus foreigners or external people should be pretty far out there. That's kind of what I'm at. I'm wondering how you engage with that that way of approaching theology?
Well, yeah, I can't. I know what you're talking about. There's a certain, a variety of politicians have said that there's these concentric circles of Christian faith that says start with your family and grow out of that, and that it's a very limited view of love and compassion and growth and what you can do for others. It's very entrenched. It's very fear-based. It's not based in Scripture, as that's my understanding of Scripture. I don't find it in Scripture where Jesus said, love your neighbor, but start with your family. And then when they're done, I want you to love the rest of your tribe, your community. And then if you can get that done, then Jesus says absolutely the opposite. And if you want to look at a good example, if you're talking to someone like that and you want to talk Bible verses, the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus purposely uses a Samaritan who's an outsider, and he purposely talks about the religious leaders walking by the Samaritan who's been beaten. The person who's been beaten, and it's the Samaritan, the outsider, the person that they kind of despise, the other, who actually helps. So Jesus is very clearly playing with the thoughts of the people of his time by saying it's the other is us, and we can learn from that. So I don't find that I'm sure there's Christian teaching or teaching from the Bible for every viewpoint, I suppose, but I don't know that one. I can't find that one in Scripture that I understand. Yeah, so I don't. Do you want to really get into a biblical argument about it? I don't know, but what's interesting is the vice president used that as an argument, and he's a Catholic convert, and he's arguing against his own faith leadership, which is the Pope and the cardinals and the bishops. So if you're a Roman Catholic, it's a very hierarchical. You believe what the leadership teaches you, the Pope and the leadership. So that might be, if I were speaking to the vice president, I would say, how do you, as a Roman Catholic, make that case? Because the Catholic Church has been very explicit on this. Is that helpful?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Jason?
So, in your sermon, it sounds to me like you're saying that the righteous thing to do right now, and that a lot of leaders, faith leaders, are saying the righteous thing to do is to step in and stop the jackboot thugs who are wearing masks and who are going after people, right? So lay in front of their car, block their vehicle, put yourself in their way. That's the righteous thing to do. I'm just questioning: how confident can we be that is the right thing to do? Maybe these guys are going after some pretty horrible people who've done things that we disagree with as a society. Maybe they're going after some child molester or someone who's murdered someone, or who's bashed gay people, or who's been beating women. And I don't think I'm throwing out a hypothetical here. I think that in many cases that may be what they're doing. So are you doing the righteous thing when you don't know who you're protecting?
That's a really good question. I think I will just say one of my strengths or weaknesses in my own life, I don't know, but it's just my mindset is I'm very deferential to the police. Okay, so that's just for whatever reason. It's in my background, but I've kind of always want to be, I'm sympathetic to law and order. I just did a training with the New York Police Department, and I said, I really respect what you do, and very sincerely, and I do. What's interesting to me in this particular case is that the police are in conflict with ICE. So that's something to pay attention to. So a really good interview was the police chief of Minneapolis this last week, talking about the practices of ICE are not the practices that we're trained in. And in fact, that will undermine the police, because people will associate the behavior of ICE, who appears to be poorly trained in their tactics. Yeah. So, this is complicated, right? This is complicated. I'm sure in a lot of cases they are doing their job and guard. And I will just say, this will be controversial, but whenever I see them, I say, thank you for being here. because these are people who were assigned here, but most people are screaming at them and cursing at them and calling them names. So it's complicated. We've got police, we've got National Guard, now what I'm very afraid of is that this is all being set up into a situation where we could have a conflagration in, so many ICE agents, so with the police, with somebody who shoots something. So we're going to have to, those who disagree with this are going to have to decide, where is my wisdom to my love? For example, the woman who was shot, I would not recommend pulling your car in front of officers. So I don't think that reflected wisdom. To the man who shot her, every police study said that's not the true way to operate. You don't stand in front of a car and you don't have a gun lifted. So in other words, in each of these very complicated situations, we can't just, there's a tendency to want to jump on one side and say that the other side's, it's complex. And I think we want to embrace that complexity and say, what do I think is the wise and loving thing in this situation? I just saw today a group went into a church in Minneapolis to protest the minister and broke up the worship service because the minister was pro-ICE. I think that's a disastrous strategy. It reflects no wisdom. It will have very bad consequences because it emboldens back and forth. So that's kind of how I would look at that. So I think we're in a situation though where we're getting, it's getting complicated. It's getting very complicated to figure out what's right. I'm personally afraid of ISIS getting so much power and so much size that it becomes potentially a militia within the United States, which we've never really had, and that's concerning too. I'm not saying that's the case right now, and I don't refer to them, some people sort of refer to them as the Gestapo and so forth, but it's concerning. I think we just have to kind of constantly pay attention to it. But I hear what you're saying. I'm somebody who likes the balance of both, but I don't think that they're operating with they're very professional operation in that. So does that address the question? Yeah, very good question. Matthias?
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is something that I've always kind of wondered and struggled with, but to what extent do you think as Christians there is or should be a difference between how we view our obligations like on an individual level and or how we view like obligations and like how we take actions like as political actors or on the state level, and whether those should be different? Like, should the state be more concerned with wisdom, truth, order, stability, and on the individual level we should be more compassionate, or should it be both on both levels and it's kind of like a dynamic tension, they feed each other? Like, I wonder how because I know in some like in the Catholic tradition at one point, or there was like Cardinal Richelieu in like France believed that there's a reason of state, that like the state acts as an earthly thing and it doesn't have to be Catholic or moral, and then individually we should be Catholic and moral. So like I wonder like if that's like right, or whether we should actually think about truth and love should be always kind of intertwined at every level, I guess.
Thanks. That's a great question. I guess my answer to that would be, I believe that we should be wrestling with truth and love in our thinking about policy as citizens, as human beings individually. And that could be different on a different day. Concrete example, if somebody was being chased by ICE down Q Street and came to here, I would take them in. I would fight against the thing that I'd be making a snap decision. So that's, on the spur of the moment, love and wisdom in tension. I actually believe that our faith should absolutely engage our politics. That it should inform our politics. I think one of the problems in our country right now is that because faith has completely disintegrated within the culture, that other meaning-making systems have emerged that are less helpful. So I think that the Christian way of looking at things at its best was a very modulating force in the politics. That said, does that mean I'm obviously, and I know you're not saying this, but I would never say like, I want my faith to be to run politics. No, it's a pluralistic thing. The cool thing about Sweden, embrace other faiths and then be informed by it. Like, wow, that that person of that faith sees it this way. That's interesting. I can learn from that. So I would say it would inform me as an individual. It would inform my decisions as I engage in everything I do. I might have to translate how I do it differently. For example, when I do the trainings that I do on cultural translation, I mention not a word of spirituality because my audience is going to be all different things, and I don't want to. There's a fear that a minister is pushing an agenda. So I think you just have to be thoughtful about it. But I think this would be a good prescription for society to constantly looking at love and truth. And each of us kind of lean one way or the other, and most of the churches lean one way or the other. I would encourage us to look at the other side that we're not as comfortable with and get comfortable with that. Like look at the other side instead of like saying, no, it has to be love, 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 or the other side saying, oh, look at all that. I think we want to just balance the two is a really good thing, and I think it's a nice lens. Does that answer your question? Okay. Did I miss any of the questions in the chat?
There were no questions. A bit of a debate about what was being said and some.
Oh, I see. Alpha says, I'm worried that ICE becomes a permanent fixture. Yes, it does seem like it would be. Statistically, fewer than 10% getting picked up by ICE have a criminal record. Yes. Yes, and now the history of failed immigration policies. Yes. Yes, that's all. So Ross is concluding that the problem is the Republicans on the immigration issue. Our congregation leans more to the left, so that would be a thing. If that would be a natural conclusion. I don't think that's the best strategy is to say it's that party that. You make that decision in the voting booth and who you're going to vote for. But I think that I could make an equal argument that this situation was also created by the open policies of visual images of people walking across the border too that scared people into a state, and then it was exploited. I think so. Joy,
thanks, Rich.
I think you'll be I think you'll be the last one.
As someone who lives in the Bay Area with a variety of immigrants over many years, I've heard immigrants speak essentially the same way you did earlier, which is, I came here legally, I played by the rules, I want to see people come here through a rules-based system. So my concern is that we have trouble seeing people who do not look like us externally as full human beings, and that's exacerbated by political polarity.
Yes, all that. I think all that you just said is accurate and true. And sure, this plays up of our fears of others, and particularly people who look different or speak differently. And Katie says, I know we're short on time. Just a really quick question. I think you mentioned some community members have asked about doing things like vigils. Is anyone in our community organizing like that? Can it be shared, maybe in the newsletter? Thanks. I love your sermon. Well, Annabelle hasn't spoken today, but it might be worth a little article for the newsletter, Annabelle, if we can do it, or if you can follow her on Facebook. She is, long story short, she's in West Virginia, and she took part of a protest and a vigil in would be the hardcore MAGA country in Moorfield, West Virginia, at the chicken plant last week. And I know it's very brave. And if you read the feedback to her doing that, Annabelle is doing literally the work we all talk about. She's saying to each person most of the comments are critical of that, mean. And Annabelle keeps saying, "Oh, could we talk about it? Could we talk about it?" And it's kind of mockery, and so it's a very difficult world. I admire her courage. That's one of the best examples. And I would say we'll be all guided, each of us, by that balance of love and wisdom, and figuring out where we can have the greatest impact and figure that out.
Hi, I
We,
just
we can all
want to
pray.
add that most of the people who drove by our protest, sup- like honked in support, even though this is a county that voted 78% for Trump. So I was surprised by actually the level of support we got for the protest, and I still think the nasty comments are minority. Most of the comments are actually supportive. I think we have a bully problem with a lot of the majority of people who can't speak up, and small minority of people just being extremely loud, um, and trying to silence anybody who disagrees with them. And so I think this is why it's just hard, it's important to figure out how to connect with as many people as possible, however, whatever that takes, even if it's just a conversation on the side. But anyways, that would be just what I learned from trying to do this since 2007. Figure out how to advance immigration issue and deal with the hatred that it elicits, and realizing people are really misinformed, especially about the impact of immigrants on our economy. How much it hurts our local economy to deport people or to have them leave out of safety reasons. It ends up hurting all the small businesses and big businesses in the area. And sometimes people can only learn that the hard way. They don't see any value in immigrants. They just have classified them as basically subhuman, but they are a huge part of our economy. And I think that's one way of trying to push the conversation. So,
Thank you, Annabelle. Thanks for your stuff. And we should also put a link in. Annabelle did a documentary on immigration in Northern Virginia 10 years ago.
yeah, there was a big fight about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you can maybe put that in the chat, or we'll put it into the newsletter.
Uh-huh.
And David just says that being in Akron, Ohio, that it was a place built by immigrants. There's no reason to fear anyone from any country. Completely agree, David. And I'll just say the most hardworking people I know in the United States in my whole experience, my whole life, have been immigrants. So is this one more question from Jose or Katie? Or
Yeah, I guess just sort of to put a bow on the whole conversation, I'm just
yes.
curious, what would you counsel? How do I find myself getting angry all the time at what I'm perceiving as just the enormous hypocrisy of how the Venn diagram of people who would be the first to step in line and say we are a Christian nation, we were founded a Christian nation, and yet are the same ones who are the first to say we should expel everyone, America for the Americans. Like there's such overlap there, and I find it incredibly angering. And I'm trying to figure out how would you advise to be charitable about that, to be graceful about how infuriating seeing some of these things happen around the country by the people who claim that they are Christian.
Well, just really quickly in the interest of time, I'd say you're a very historic person. Look at history. The Christian church has been used for all kinds of things throughout all of history that none of us agree with. And it will always be used. It's a very powerful thing. It's a belief system for a lot of people. And I think the best thing we can do is be an alternative. I don't think it's engaging so much. I've certainly done my share of debating that other people from other Christians in my life, more like in the 1990s. But I also think that right today, the best thing we can do is be an alternative, is have an alternative message in the way we live and the way we act and the way we speak about it. And I think in urban areas, we're probably a little afraid to say, my Christian faith says this, that we should care for the least of these. They are not shy about saying their Christian faith says what you've just said. I think we all, it's okay to be angry too. I just want to say, it's okay. Sometimes we might need that to motivate us to do what we have to do in life too. So Christianity has been a cudgel for every social issue from the time of the Roman Empire. And the message of Jesus is still beautiful and powerful and transformative. And so we have to do a better job ourselves of living that out. So people say, how are you doing it? Or why are you so kind? Or what are you? And then we can say, this is the faith that leads us to that. So we need to be better examples. That's the only example people see. So thank you. It was it's a hot topic, prolonged discussion, but I didn't want to cut it off because there's so many questions and it's a big issue. A couple of you recommend that I do a topic like this, and so if you have a topic you want me to do, I will do it. We will not steer clear of any topic. So send me your topics that you want me to preach on. Some of you already have done that, and you can add that to the survey as well.